550 knots underwater should not be possible. It's doing 550 knots underwater. 550 knots, the sonar tech whispers, breath fogging the mic underwater. The officer's reply is a knife edge, radio silence. Log it local. Eyes on. On the scope, a contact slices across the shelf edge like a thrown blade. Physics says cavitation should tear it apart. It accelerates. A ready P, 8 circles, denied intercept. The unknown outruns the geometry and vanishes near the continental shelf's drop-off. One detail from this night won't stay buried. Years later, it surfaces in a briefing with a single line underlined twice. To understand what the Pentagon heard, we need to rewind to the room where it began. The radar room night, the contact that shouldn't exist. The night duty section was lean. Half a dozen watchstanders, stale coffee, and hum from consoles that never sleep. Careers ride in rooms like this. So does safety. Misidentify an enemy sub, and you invite a phone call no one wants. Miss a real threat, and the ocean makes its point the hard way. The first ping wasn't even a ping. It was a ghost glide, a sliver on surface search that looked like a sea bird catching wind. Then the bearing drifted too fast, the range collapsed too cleanly, and every stomach in Combat Information Center tightened at the same time. Contacts don't enter the picture at that velocity. Not here. Not hugging a thermocline like it owned it. The petty officer on radar leaned closer, thumb scrubbing the range gate like he could polish the numbers into cents. "Scope's off," he muttered, not sure whether he was hoping or warning. He toggled filters, killed clutter, cycled game. The sliver sharpened, then split. One clean return threading the island's shadow, the other wobbling like a reflection that didn't know where to settle. Meanwhile, across the room, sonar went quiet in that way only veterans hear. The silence that means everyone's listening harder. Passive returns stacked into a character that shouldn't exist. No blade rate, no cavitation bloom, no shaft harmonics. Just a pressure signature sliding along the shelf break with surgical disinterest. The supervisor keyed the net. CIC, sonar has possible fast mover bearing 217, depth unknown, speed standby. Define fast, the TO said, already moving toward the plot. 3 digits, came back tight. Climbing. The ocean is generous with friction. Even a modern torpedo fights it like a wall. But on the plot, the line bent without consequence, turning inside its own wake, ignoring hydrodynamics like they were optional. It cut 90 degrees, bled no speed, then halted. Stopped. Dead in the water, if that phrase still applied. Mark time, the TO said. The room obeyed. Seconds can be a verdict. Contact stationary, radar confirmed. Range stable. Sonar, the TO asked. Pressure signature holds. No wake. No thermal on IR. The EO operator added, eyes wide at an empty gray field. And then it moved. Not a ramp up. A sprint. The kind of onset that makes pilots swear and engineers quit. The tech with the mic choked on the number before he said it. 550 knots, he whispered, because saying it loud would make it absurd. Underwater. Radio silence, the TO said, the order landing like a lid on boiling water. Record local. No external traffic. Track priority 1. While that was happening, someone else was timing it against the shelf contours. The contact threaded the bathymetry like it had the chart etched into its skin. It skimmed the ridge, dove toward the trench, then slid back toward the surface layer without punching it. The speed graph looked like a heartbeat spiking at shock. The petty officer tried one more trick, a manual sweep to sanity check the digital track. The sweep returned the same straight truth. He looked at his hand, the knuckles white where the headset squeezed. I'm not breaking it, he told nobody, a quiet deal with himself. CIC cross-checked everything. Passive bearings lined with radar skin paint. EO saw nothing but flat sea. IR saw no heat halo, no cavitation plume. The ocean stayed quiet. If anything was moving that fast, the water should have screamed. It didn't. A micro-story lodged itself in the room. The XO had left his coffee near the radar repeater, and now it sat untouched, a dark mirror to the green glow. He reached for it twice and forgot both times, tethered to the plot as if eye contact could slow a line. Complication arrived the way it always does, sideways. A second return popped in, offset by a handful of degrees, lagging the first like a wingman who refused formation. It wavered, then locked. Sonar called 2 pressure signatures, 1 faint. The TO considered decoy, parasite craft, or something the Doctrine binder didn't have a tab for. Designate second contact, he said. 2 symbols now danced the shelf's edge. The faint one drifted close, then either merged or drowned in the brighter echo. Sonar couldn't swear which. The ocean doesn't file affidavits. Any thermal discontinuity? The TO asked. Negative. Sea state steady. Surface anomaly nil, EO replied, voice flattening to keep pace with the unreality. They ran the checklist that saves reputations. Power transients? None. Recorder dropouts? Nominal. Mode conflicts? Green across the board. Even the old trick, tap the console, blame the hardware, fell flat when diagnostics came back clean. If the system was lying, it was lying with conviction across independent channels. The TO gave the order everyone knew was coming. Sanitize the log. Restricted distribution. We'll brief on secure. The duty log got the gentle but firm hand of redaction. The after-action debrief picked up a classification stamp that would keep it out of easy reach and out of easy denial. The last plot point showed the contact arrow toward the continental shelf's lip and vanish where the seafloor fell away like a trapdoor. No splash. No boil. Just gone. When the watch was relieved, the petty officer who doubted his scope walked out into a night that didn't feel like the one he'd walked in from. He touched the headset imprint on his temple, a pale crescent pressed into skin, and decided, for now, not to tell the story outside the room. Stories like that of gravity. They pull careers into their orbit. While that log disappeared into a compartment with no windows, the pattern didn't. Other rooms, other nights, other crews would sit under the same green glow and watch lines that shouldn't exist do things that shouldn't happen. And someone would whisper a number that doesn't belong to the ocean. What 550 knots means underwater. The physics wall. Here's the part that keeps engineers awake. Water punishes speed. Push a hull past a few dozen knots and drag climbs like a cliff. Around 30 to 50 knots, pressure drops along sharp edges and spinning blades. The water flashes into vapor, cavitation. It chews metal, screams acoustically, and leaves a frothing signature any hydrophone would hear from miles away. That's the wall. Everyone knows it. To go faster, you need to change the rules. The known trick is supercavitation. Wrap the craft in a bubble of gas so it flies through vapor, not water. The Russian Shkval torpedo is the poster child, rocket-driven, blunt nose, a cavitator disc up front to shed water and inflate a pocket of gas. Best public numbers put it roughly in the 180 to 200 knot range, straight line sprint, poor turning, deafening noise, and a hot, turbulent wake. It's fast, but you pay for it with control and stealth. Now stack that against the track in our plot room. 550 knots, underwater, with hard turns inside its own wake and a dead stop on command. No roar, no plume, no thermal bloom. If it was supercavitating, we should have seen a multi-sensor tantrum. Heat from rocket exhaust or gas generators. Bubbles shimmering up like a boil. Acoustic thunder from gas collapsing behind it. Instead, quiet ocean, clean scope, pressure signature without the mess. An engineer we spoke with did the napkin math. At that speed, even a fist-sized object would be dumping absurd energy into the medium. The heat load alone should leave a ribbon of warmer water, slicing the thermocline like a zipper. The bubble collapse behind a supercavitating body creates shock fronts, bangs and rattles that sonar operators know in their bones. None of that showed. He circled the only honest conclusion. Either the object wasn't pushing the water the way we do, or our assumptions about what it was interacting with were wrong. Let's get concrete about the wall. Drag in water scales brutally with velocity, double speed, and you're not doubling resistance, you're multiplying it. Traditional propellers cavitate long before triple-digit knots. Pump jets mitigate, but they're still chewing the ocean. Supercavitation breaks the contact by surrounding the body in vapor, but steering is a nightmare because control surfaces have nothing solid to bite. You can vector thrust, tweak bubble geometry, or bleed gas asymmetrically, but high G turns inside a small radius? Not with known control authority. Not at 550 knots. Then there's pressure. At modest depths, ambient pressure is already measured in atmospheres. Any bubble you ride has to be sustained energetically against collapse. That costs power. Power makes heat. Heat makes signatures you can't hide if you're doing it chemically or electrically in a human-built way. Our sensors didn't find them. The ocean was stubbornly normal. So the fork in the road looks like this. Option 1. Sensor stack failure across independent systems. radar, passive acoustics, perhaps even EO/IR windows, correlating a phantom that behaves consistently. That would imply a systemic problem with national implications, because those sensors aren't boutique, they're fleet-wide. Option 2. A propulsion or field interaction regime that reduces effective drag without vaporizing the medium, and that either masks or bypasses the usual energy bookkeeping we rely on to catch fast movers. People toss around terms like magneto-hydrodynamics and field reduction, as if they're levers you can pull off the shelf. MHD has been tested. It's quiet at low speeds and terrible at producing thrust at scale in seawater without insane power and heat signatures. Field reduction, the idea of manipulating spacetime or local inertia, lives at the edge of theory and rumor. If something can alter how water feels around a body, reducing viscosity or decoupling inertia, then the cavitation wall stops being a wall. But we don't have a lab report for that. We have tracks that behave as if someone does. Engineers look for the dirty fingerprints, vortices, harmonics, turbulence cascades, thermal scars, bubble curtains. None showed. The petty officer's console told one story. The ocean refused its usual footnotes. That mismatch is the tell. If the medium isn't screaming and the craft is still sprinting, either the medium has been tamed locally, or the interaction has been shifted somewhere our instruments don't look. Here's the stakes talk everyone in the briefing room hears. If it's real, our tech gap isn't a step, it's a canyon. Every doctrine built on acoustic superiority, on speed versus stealth trade-offs, on torpedo kinematics, starts to wobble. If it's a sensor artifact, then our surveillance net has a hole big enough for a carrier group to sail through, and that's a different kind of nightmare. What nobody in that room could shake was the maneuver package. Speed is one claim, control is another. Stops, right-angle cuts, shelf-tracing climbs, all without the ocean's normal protest. That's where the physics wall becomes a mental one. The numbers don't just overshoot our gear, they insult our map of what water allows. If the physics don't fit, you don't throw away the night. You go looking for more nights, more rooms, more signatures that rhyme. Because a single track can be an error. A pattern is a briefing. And this wouldn't be the only time the ocean stayed quiet when it shouldn't have. The catalog, decades of Navy USO incidents. One night can be a glitch. A decade of them turns into a catalog. Quiet briefings start with a map and a handful of pins, then the pins grow teeth. The pattern stretches from the Catalina Channel off Southern California, down past Puerto Rico's abyssal trench, out across the North Atlantic and up into Arctic training boxes where the ice cracks like old paint. Different crews, different platforms, the same impossible speed, the same surgical indifference to water. The Catalina thread goes back to the Cold War. Surface ships logging fast movers that outran any torpedo solution. Submarines hearing pressure signatures pacing them, then sliding ahead like a thought. The targets would pop in near the islands, trace the shelf break, then either climb toward the surface without breaking it or dive over the lip of the continental drop like a base jumper taking a breath. In the 1980s, a destroyer team tracked one for 7 minutes. The plot looked like a zigzag cut with a steel ruler, too sharp for anything with a propeller. Puerto Rico carries its own stories. The trench there is an elevator to blackness. 3 crews flying ASW patterns logged sonobuoys going quiet excited. That odd combination of no noise and clear presence, right before a fast pressure change streaked down the gradient. A reserve pilot, years later, told a friend about a white object like a capsule, entering the water with no splash, no foam, as if the surface had been peeled open for it. He said it almost as an apology, then shut the door on the subject. Cold water doesn't make it sane. In the Arctic, under ice where mistakes last longer, submarine crews reported runners that crossed their baffles and slid off their quarter with no blade count and no cavitation bloom. The term wasn't in any manual. It was the word they used when the ocean felt haunted. During a NATO exercise, a fast mover paced a line of boats near a choke point, threading between hulls like it understood lane discipline. The formal write-up called it unresolved anomalous contact. The watchstanders called it something else. Micro-stories give the catalog a pulse. A young sonar operator rotated off a boat after 3 deployments, told his brother he'd had enough of chasing ghosts, and switched to a shore billet before he left the service entirely. Another story comes from a Hello crew chief who swore he watched a pale shape slide under their hover at night. No phosphorescent trail, no disturbed foam, just a clean absence moving purposefully. He waited until retirement to say it out loud. Parallel threads kept the pattern from becoming a campfire tale. Submarines reported shadowing by silent fast movers during certification runs. The contacts maintained standoff as if they were observing training profiles, then departed at angles that made sonar plots look like glitches until they repeated. Enough to be routine. Surface groups experienced seam cuts, mirror-still lines on the ocean that traveled against wind and swell, followed by contacts erupting from the surface into air and vanishing on airborne radar. Those reports would land in a stack already primed by rumors of Transmedium craft, and nobody laughed anymore. Complications crept in around human activity. Incidents spiked near training ranges, San Clemente, Autec, northern edge areas, places wired with hydrophones and wrapped in patrol arcs. They also concentrated along undersea telecom cables and power interconnects, corridors of infrastructure humming with electricity and information. A cable team logged an unexplained attenuation followed by a restored signal after a fast mover track crossed the line. No fishing damage. No quake. Just a bruise that healed itself too neatly. The catalog grew teeth in internal memos. Language shifted from if to how often and what parameters recur. Analysts noted the same signatures: sharp angle course changes without a speed trade, dead stop holds, silent acceleration, and disappearances near bathymetric features. The memos stopped trying to weigh belief. They counted behaviors. One-line surfaces again and again. No acoustic or thermal correlates commensurate with observed kinematics. That sentence is what anxiety looks like in a briefing. A pilot added a strand that threaded back to Catalina. He'd run intercepts on drone swarms near the Channel Islands. Lights in formation, small, fast, persistent. On one of those nights, the swarm hugged the surface and a seam appeared, a knife cut in moonlight. The lights dove into it, and the seam closed like nothing had happened. "We thought someone was spoofing us," he said. "Then we realized spoofing is a capability, not a conclusion." Across all this, duty logs show a pattern of vanishing ink. Entries scrubbed down to weather. After-action summaries that jumped from initial detection to secure channel debrief. FOIA responses came back with the shape of a story hidden under black rectangles. The absence wasn't random, it mapped to the hotspots. Meanwhile, a fisherman in Avalon kept a careful notebook. Years later, his granddaughter matched his notes by accident with publicly known Navy range dates. Nights of lights under the water moving like schools but straight, lined up with exercises. He hadn't known where the Navy trained. He just knew when the sea felt busy. By the time these incidents earned their own briefing slide, they weren't a curiosity. They were workload, pattern analysis requests, extra sonobuoys, tasking for P8s to sweep not just sky and sea, but the seam between them. Crews cracked cautious jokes about company in the hallways of the ocean, and then went quiet when a new track appeared that put the joke back in its case. The catalog doesn't argue. It accumulates. It points to a shape moving along our coasts and trenches, attentive to our ranges and cables, present in our training lanes, and indifferent to the physics that hold our boats together. Meanwhile, one hotspot kept returning to the briefings, a corridor where pins on the map stacked like a countdown. The Catalina Corridor, America's USO alley. You can draw the corridor with a fingertip. From Point Conception down past Santa Barbara, threading between San Nicolas, Santa Barbara Island, San Clemente, and Catalina, then sliding off the shelf into water that turns from blue to black. Major shipping lanes cross here. Carrier groups cycle through. The Navy's range complex laces the water with sensors. If anything strange is going to show up, this is where it has an audience that can measure it. The old stories start in the 1950s, when radar vans on the bluffs and destroyers off the islands logged fast movers under the surface, tracking close to the shelf break. The language was different then. Unusual submarine behavior, probable interference, but the plot lines match. An object appears near Anacapa, skates along the 200-meter contour like it's keyed to the bathymetry, then darts south toward San Clemente's range waters, where it either vanishes or rides the seam near the surface, refusing to break it. One night in the 1970s left a scar on a sonar operator's voice. He was riding a frigate east of Santa Cruz Island, listening to the ocean's metronomes, shrimp crackle, distant screw beats, when a smooth, pressure-heavy presence slid into his band. No blade rate, no machinery thrum. It paced the ship's course for 3 minutes, then pivoted in place and ran perpendicular, crossing their bow in seconds. He watched the bearing swing like a gate. The log reads like any other. Times, bearings, ranges, terse notes. He told his roommate later, it moved like a pen line. The corridor collects micro-stories that rhyme. A Catalina harbor patrolman swore he saw pale geometry under a glasscom surface one August night, rectangular and steady, moving without ripples toward the channel. A helicopter crew out of North Island held a high hover during a range evolution and watched a seam cut the moon's reflection from stern to bow, as if someone were dragging a knife across the water. A yacht captain, ex-Navy, radioed a submerged obstacle moving at high speed off Avalon, then withdrew his report when the schedule officer called him back and suggested he'd seen a pod of dolphins. Local lives overlap Navy dates in ways no one planned. A fisherman working out of 2 harbors kept meticulous logs on current and bite patterns, the way old-timers do because the ocean will cheat you if you let it. On 4 separate nights, he wrote the same line, lights underwater, straight, fast, no break. Years later, his granddaughter compared his notebooks to published range announcements. The nights matched major exercises. He'd never heard of AUTEC or San Clemente's box numbers. He just wrote what he saw. By the 1990s, pattern language crept into briefings. Catalina wasn't an outlier, it was a lane. Contacts appeared at the northern end, near the channel's pinch, then moved south along the shelf, staging in the lee of the islands before sprints toward deep water. Meanwhile, shore stations logged surface seams moving against wind and swell, narrow bands where the water's skin looked wrong. Sometimes those seams ended in splash events, only there was no splash. The surface displaced, then smoothed, and the track continued below. Multiple platforms started to stack their agreement. Sonar stations ashore caught pressure signatures without the expected acoustic teeth. P3 and later P8 flights dropped sonobuoys in grids, listening for prop signatures and hearing instead a presence, a moving null, a displacement without roar. Surface search radar painted transient skin returns skimming at the boundary. Electro-optical cameras rolled and recorded flat sea with a line cut through it, traveling too fast to be a tide line, too straight to be wind. Complications emerged in clusters. Incidents spiked on nights when drone activity harassed surface groups near the islands. The swarms hugged the water, and seam cuts appeared beneath them like rails. Another spike coincided with maintenance windows on undersea cables threading from the mainland to island facilities. A team fixing a repeater recorded an unexplained attenuation, followed by clean signal as a fast track crossed the cable line. No trawl marks, no anchor drag. The bruise healed without explanation. Inside the range office, a quiet designation took shape. Not a public label, nothing a reporter could FOIA. Just a shorthand in tasking notes. Persistent anomaly area. It meant extra buoys on certain nights, additional eyes on the seam between mediums, and a heads up on the net when ships transited the pinch points between island shadows. Crews stopped rolling their eyes. They started drawing bigger boxes on their mental maps. A micro-moment stuck with a P8 senior chief. He drank his coffee cold because a seam appeared beneath their orbit. The surface looked like muscle under skin, tension moving. The buoys didn't squeal. They went clean and taut, like a string plucked outside hearing. The analyst in back marked the event no correlate, and saved the file to a compartment that lived outside normal traffic. The Catalina Corridor isn't a monster tale. It's a route with rhythm. Entries near the northern islands. Shelf tracing runs at speeds that make Doctrine stumble. Surface seams that act like doors. Departures over the continental lip toward deep water. The Navy doesn't publish this, the ocean does. And in internal spaces, where language gets careful, the maps around Catalina grow more ink. The ocean hides things. Here, sometimes they leave clean lines on the page. The Tic-Tac connection, seam cuts and splash events. The first time aircrew started saying seam, it sounded like slang. After the Nimitz flights in 2004, it became a marker. Pilots described a line on the Pacific, a strip where the surface looked stitched tight. Commander Fravre's intercept didn't begin in the sky. It began with a disturbance at the water, a churning patch and a shape beneath it that refused to pick a domain. Controllers saw a primary vanish, then another appear low, accelerate, and step out of the radar's expectations. From the cockpit, the white capsule, call it Tic-Tac if you like, didn't behave like any aircraft. No wings, no exhaust. It cut angles that made stomachs float. The part that unsettled everyone came seconds earlier, the watermark. A seam that moved against swell, holding its crisp line while the object either rose from it or played station over it. It was like the ocean had a hatch, one aircrew said later, then asked not to be quoted. Back in the ready room, the debrief felt split screen. Tapes pulled, recorders collected for higher-level analysis. On the scope review, a low contact merged with the surface seam. Then the airborne track executed a climb that chewed through altitude markers in a blink. The pilot's narrative said emerging. The paperwork said maneuvering near a surface disturbance. Both were technically true. One told a bigger story. Meanwhile, in the radar van, operators watched the low-altitude return skate, just above sea clutter, without ever showing the wing rock wobble you'd get in ground effect. It didn't hug the air, it ignored it. When it accelerated, the Doppler spike looked like a smear, not a ramp. The van chief made a note he'd never written before. Splash without splash. He meant a splash event minus the physics. No plume, no spray, just a displacement that closed clean. This is where the seam language bled into Catalina. Crews working the corridor started logging seam cuts, followed by airborne UAP tracks, and, later that night, underwater fast movers racing the shelf. 1P. 3 crew reported a seam crossing beneath them as a separate track leaped skyward and then winked off. The buoys didn't hear masts or rotors. They heard quiet pressure moving like a firm hand under canvas. The link wasn't a theory slide. It was a habit in the data. Surface seams, then splash events that lacked splashes, then either an object ascending to the sky or diving to the trench. Pilots who'd never thought about oceans began to redraw their mental maps. "We watch the sky," a WSO said. "Turns out we need to watch the water's skin." He rubbed his temples and added softly, "And what's under it?" Complications came fast. When investigators asked for the full recorder packages from flights with seam events, some sets arrived with missing frames. Not wiped, corrupted, like a hiccup swallowed the seconds when an emergence occurred. The official narrative hardened around unidentified airborne, while the crews started a quiet file labeled Transmedium. In that folder, you'd find the Catalina seams, the Puerto Rico entries with no splash, and the Nimitz patch of boiling water that calmed too quickly. One aircrew microstory. A pilot flying chase on a training hop saw a long scar pulling across the sea, sharp and unnatural. He nosed down for a closer look. The scar stopped, as if it noticed him, and became ordinary water. A minute later, a white cylinder streaked up his 9 o'clock and disappeared. He didn't radio it. He waited until the ground, then said it out loud once. The intel officer's pen hovered, then resumed on a different line. Radar technicians talk about seam ghosts with a grudging respect. You get a track that rides the side lobes, then firms up into a target that shouldn't be that clean at sea level. EO rolls and captures an immaculate horizon, except for one ruler-straight defect sliding upwind. Seconds later, the airborne track breaks out. The term splash event gets used for both directions, down into the seam, up out of it, without the signature splash. It's bureaucratic language for a door opening without hinges. In briefings, the Transmedium hypothesis stopped sounding like science fiction and started sounding like a checkbox. "Sky isn't the only domain," one briefer said, and nobody laughed. The questions shifted. If an object can move the seam, what's moving it? If it can exit the water without tearing it, what's it doing to the medium? There were no confident answers, only a narrowing of possibilities that all felt outside our playbook. Data recorders kept getting pulled. Narratives diverged, pilots spoke in straight lines. Paperwork curved around terms that wouldn't survive a FOIA. Still, the seams kept cutting, the splashless splashes kept marking transitions, and crews who'd never shared a story started finishing each other's sentences. The link wasn't a rumor. It was a rhythm, and every time a seam appeared, someone in CIC reached for a second. Plot, one for the sky, and one for what waited below. Propulsion without plumes, field effects, and silent speed. Propulsion decides who owns the ocean. For a century, dominance meant pushing water better. Propellers, pump jets, and the brute compromise between speed and stealth. The night of 550 knots mocked that trade. If something can sprint without leaving a trail, propulsion isn't just hardware, it's physics turned into policy. Start with what we've tried. Supercavitation creates a protective bubble, letting a body ride vapor, not liquid. It's loud, hot, and stubborn in turns. You can shape the bubble, bleed gas to steer, and vector thrust, but steering authority lives on a knife edge. Everyone who's tested it comes back with the same bruises. You trade agility and silence for speed, and you still leave a thermal and acoustic mess. Our systems would have caught that. They didn't. Magneto-hydrodynamics promised quiet thrust, electromagnetic fields pushing conductive seawater. In trials, it worked in pools and prototypes, then hit power walls. Real thrust demanded energy levels that cooked the medium. Conductivity helped a little, heat betrayed everything. Engineers joked you could move a boat or keep it secret, not both. If an object in our plot moved by MHD, the ocean should have carried its heat like gossip. The buoys had nothing to say. There's another family of ideas that lives in the margins. Field effects that decouple a craft from the drag and inertia that punish us. Reduce effective mass, and you dodge the whiplash of instant acceleration. Alter the medium's properties locally, viscosity, density, and water stops being molasses. These aren't off-the-shelf solutions. They read like rumors until a track turns 90 degrees at triple-digit underwater speeds without kicking the sea. A retired propulsion designer told us about a DARPA study that chased boundary layer control at non-thermal cost. They tried exotic coatings, electrified skins, microbubble injection at scale. Gains came in inches, not miles. Microbubbles could slick a hull, but they screamed in sonar and looked like a smoke trail underwater. Electrified skins flirted with corrosion and power bleed. The designer shrugged. We solve problems we could measure. This thing solves the ones we don't know how to see. So what would a silent sprinter need? First, a way to keep pressure gradients from collapsing into cavitation. That implies either lifting the craft's interaction out of the water, some kind of induced sheath, or making the water not water, right at the interface. Second, a control system that doesn't rely on fins biting fluid. If the medium can't grab you, you can't bank. You have to point and translate. The plot we watched looked like pointing and translating. The heat ledger is the tell. Energy in, signatures out. Rockets dump heat, generators dump heat, batteries dump heat under heavy draw. We saw no plume, no thermal ribbon gnawing through the thermocline. That doesn't mean no energy. It means either energies we don't capture with current windows, or conversion pathways that store and release differently, or, and this is the uncomfortable fork, our sensors were fed a convincing lie. Sensor spoofing isn't science fiction. Decoys can paint radar. Acoustic projectors can throw fake blade rates. But cross-domain deception at this scale would need synchronized illusions across passive acoustics, radar grazing the surface, and EO/IR staring at the scene. It would have to maintain coherence through sharp turns and stops, spoofing geometry as well as presence. Nations try. They fail at this fidelity. If someone had cracked that, the first place we'd see it is a fleet exercise going blind. We didn't go blind. We watched something act outside our playbook. Another retired hand, this one from a classified hydrodynamics program, described a test artifact they called the Ghost. It wasn't an object, it was an effect, a patch of reduced turbulence in a tank that moved with a field coil. It made die streams behave like they'd been bribed. Scale that, he said, and a hull could sit inside a pocket where water doesn't punish motion. He laughed, not because it was funny, but because the project died on power requirements. We could make a teacup quiet, he said. The ocean wanted a power plant. The track in our story didn't drag a power plant's fingerprints behind it. Now ask the question that shapes Doctrine. If a craft can null the ocean's grip locally, it doesn't just go fast. It goes quiet, turns sharp, and treats water and air like minor variations. That's not a submarine with better blades. That's a vehicle with its own weather. A stealth that isn't hiding. It's refusing to engage the medium where we listen. Which leaves two bins. Unknown field manipulation that reassigns the costs of motion, drag, heat, noise, somewhere we aren't listening. Or sensor defeat beyond state-of-the-art, coordinated across modalities, timed to our training cycles, and patient enough to map our ranges. Either way, the Navy writes the same word on the slide, threat vector. Here's where the room goes quiet. If this is propulsion without plumes, then every cue we've trained to hunt, cavitation, wake, thermal becomes optional. Speed stops being loud. Maneuver doesn't ripple. And the old truth about the ocean, that it punishes haste, no longer belongs to us. Inside the briefings, how the Pentagon handles USOs. The first briefing didn't start with the word UFO. It started with fast mover, underwater, a speed circled in red, and a classification stamp that told everyone to watch their nouns. Stakes hit the room before the lights dimmed. Misclassify a foreign breakthrough and you risk escalation. Acknowledge an unknown and you trigger panic, interagency turf fights, and budget warfare. The briefer's voice stayed even. We're treating this as an operational security issue. Domain, Transmedium, provisional. Compartmentalization set the tone. Incidents like the 550-knot sprint didn't flow through the same pipes as routine ASW anomalies. They moved in need-to-know channels, tagged with sanitized codes that looked like weather if you weren't read in. A contact might be logged as sea surface irregularity correlated to instrument scatter, then walked by hand into a vault where the real track lived under a different number. That's not paranoia. That's how you keep curious staffers from connecting dots with unclassified glue. A lieutenant in one of those rooms learned the rule the hard way. His draft read plainly: underwater contact exceeded cavitation limits, no acoustic or thermal correlate. His supervisor slid it back and tapped the margin. Right weather, she said. Keep your bullet points inside the firewall. The paper trail needs to be clean. He understood. A clean trail is deniable, and deniable is survivable when congressional offices start calling. Meanwhile, the machine did what it always does: categorized, crosswalked, and fenced. Incidents got pushed into compartments tied to programs, not content. If your report mentioned a sensor owned by a special access program, the whole narrative inherited that program's walls, even if the meat of the story wasn't the sensor. It's classification by association, and it's brutally effective at disappearing inconvenient facts without a central memo saying, "Hide this." Congress complicated the picture. Interest spiked in closed-door sessions, driven by briefings on aerial UAP that kept dragging a toe across the ocean. Members asked staff for the underwater side of the ledger: incidents off California ranges, splash events with no splash, fast movers hugging cables. Staff ran into silos. No responsive documents, the replies said, because the responsive documents lived under code names nobody had the clearance to request by name. Inside the building, a small group pushed for coherence. "We're losing pattern recognition to compartments," 106 argued. He didn't ask to declassify, he asked to collate. The result was special tasking, an internal team tasked to pull transmedium incidents across fleets and ranges, aligning sonar, radar, IR, and EO tracks into timelines with confidence levels. Their charter fit on a single page, their inbox filled with stories that rhymed. Human moments still leaked into the edges. One officer admitted he'd told a watchstander to write whitecaps for a seam cut because the alternative, surface discontinuity coincident with emergence, would invite the wrong eyes. A FOIA officer joked she needed a stamp that said, "Try the other office," because the same three requesters kept asking for records that had been refiled under headings that sounded like maintenance. You could hear the fatigue in her laugh. And yet, while the paper trail thinned on purpose, the briefings thickened behind doors. Slides evolved from single events to clusters: Catalina seams, Puerto Rico sprints, Arctic dips, cable correlations, fast mover shadows during exercises. Headers stayed careful: operational anomalies, but the notes underneath shifted toward frequency and impact. "If this is foreign," one slide said, "deterrence calculus must adjust." If it wasn't foreign, the slide didn't say the other word. It didn't need to. The soft cover-up wasn't a conspiracy meeting at midnight. It was policy by posture. Minimize in public. Mislabel in logs. Misplace in systems where the wrong keyword returns nothing. Classify by association rather than content. Then let the bureaucracy do the rest. Leak just enough to vent pressure, then starve the story of records. The craft of not saying a thing while acting as if you did. Complications sharpened with every high-profile leak of cockpit tapes and radar returns. Media cycles flared, then starved when FOIA produced black rectangles and no records. Internally, the leaks forced clearances to tighten. Externally, they made crews think twice about filing honest language in unclassified systems. 1. Analysts started printing key plots and filing them in hard copy binders labeled like weather summaries. He'd flipped the game: hide anomaly inside normalcy but keep the line intact. That special tasking team began to speak in a dialect all their own: concurrence, cross-domain correlate, kinematic outlier, confidence high. They weren't solving the phenomenon, they were starving human error. Every time an impossible track held across sensors, the confidence ticked up. Every time a seam cut ended in a splashless splash, another pin hit the map. Their biggest one wasn't a revelation. It was a chart that stopped apologizing for itself. Behind those doors, the Pentagon's handling philosophy took shape. Treat it as threat agnostic. Focus on behavior, not origin. Adjust posture at sea, more P, 8 tasking, extra sonobuoys, revised patrol arcs around cables and choke points, without changing public doctrine. The ocean didn't get a press release. Crews got new checklists. The witnesses noticed. They saw their language cleaned, their logs trimmed, their tapes collected. Some chose silence. Others found off-ramps, anonymous calls to staffers, late-night messages to journalists known to listen. The building could compartmentalize paper. It couldn't compartmentalize lived experience. The paper trail thins, the briefer said, but witnesses keep talking. The whistleblowers, careers on the line. They didn't call themselves whistleblowers. They were sailors, aviators, watchstanders who carried nights like the 550-knot sprint around in their heads until the weight picked a crack to slip through. The stakes weren't abstract. Clearances vanish. Evaluation's cool. A single line on a FITREP can end a pension that isn't even earned yet. Still, they talked, quietly, carefully, to people who'd actually listen. One sonar chief kept his story in a manila envelope for years, a printout of bearings and times with the names clipped off. He slid it across a diner table and said, "I don't want fame. I want to know if anyone else saw what we saw." The printout showed the stall, the sprint, the turn that disrespected water. He'd circled the dead stop like a bruise. He'd also blacked out a note in the margin. XO says right weather. An aircrew from a West Coast carrier group spoke with a reporter on a park bench after sunset, phones left in their cars. He described a seam that paused under his jet, then a streak that erased altitude. His hands made the motion unconsciously. "I'm not here to burn my wings," he said. "I just can't carry it by myself anymore." He was still flying. He knew the risk. A submariner told his wife nothing for a decade, then let one detail slip. A fast mover pacing their depth changes like a mirror that refused to show their face. He flinched at his own words, as if the ocean might take offense. Later, he sat for a recorded interview, eyes on the table, and said, "If they wanted us gone, would we know?" His voice didn't rise at the question. It fell. Polygraphs hovered like weather fronts over some of these conversations. One petty officer got called into a windowless room after his anonymous tip matched a classified plot too closely. He passed the box but failed the vibe. His next set of orders moved him from frontline ASW to inventory control. He didn't need a memo to decode the message. Another witness watched his security refresher turn into a targeted lecture on unauthorized communications. He went silent, then found a back channel months later. NDAs framed every memory. "I can't say the ship," a technician repeated, apologizing with his eyes. "I can say the behavior." He recited the beats. No blade rate, no plume, speed spikes, bathymetry traced like a ruler. He described the moment a second contact merged or vanished. He didn't speculate, he refused the bait. It made him more credible, not less. Family strain ran under the surface. One spouse noticed her husband sleeping in 45-minute loops, like he was back on watch. He finally explained why the word cavitation made his jaw tighten. Another family learned to accept that certain nights were the quiet ones, followed by mornings when he'd stare at the ocean as if waiting for a confession. He wasn't chasing aliens. He was chasing a clean sentence that wouldn't cost their mortgage. Some accounts arrived through intermediaries, staffers who hosted late calls, journalists who checked details without printing names. A congressional aide kept a whiteboard with pins that weren't places but behaviors. Dead stops, seam cuts, silent sprints. She drew lines between testimonies from crews who'd never met. "I'm not classifying origin," she told a colleague. "I'm classifying patterns." Her notebook lived in a drawer that locked. Reprisals weren't always blunt. Assignments shifted by a hair. A promotion list arrived without a name everyone assumed was a lock. A performance review praised initiative and dinged judgment with no specifics. The signal traveled faster than any memo. Stay inside the nouns the building approves. Several witnesses stepped off active duty earlier than planned. One called it choosing air I could breathe. And yet, relief threaded through the risk. A retired sonar operator finished his account and exhaled like he'd been underwater too long. "You can call it whatever you want," he said. "I just wanted someone to mark the time with me." Another sent a follow-up message weeks later. "Heard your corridor piece. We saw seams. You're not wrong." The note was unsigned. It didn't need a signature to feel heavy. Their stories didn't prove origin. They anchored the map. Catalina seams. Puerto Rico sprints. Arctic shadows. cables crossed and bruised, then whole again. The same behaviors folded across decades, platforms, and pay grades, told in different voices that landed on the same verbs. Stopped, turned, accelerated, vanished. Patterns point to places. Places point, eventually, to intent. That's where their voices got quietest. They didn't claim answers. They asked better questions at cost. And in the asking, they turned anomalies into a ledger the Pentagon could ignore in public, but couldn't dismiss in the rooms where posture is set. Patterns in the deep, cables, trenches, and restricted zones. Follow the pins and they settle on the same arteries. Cable corridors, power interconnects, SOSUS nodes, and the narrow throats where navies practice getting through each other. The ocean's infrastructure isn't abstract, it hums. And the tracks we're chasing keep brushing those wires like fingers on a harp. Start with the cables. From the mainland to the islands off California, from Florida to Puerto Rico, across the North Atlantic, glass strands carry the world's speech. Maintenance crews know every mile. They log bruises. Several times, attenuation dips appeared, signal strength fell, noise didn't rise, right as a fast mover track crossed the plotted cable line. No trawl scars. No quake signatures. The signal recovered too cleanly, like a hand lifted off a throat. Power interconnects tell a similar story. Shore-to-island lines emit a faint electromagnetic halo. On nights when silent pressure signatures pace the Catalina shelf, shore stations noted flutter on power telemetry, brief, narrow disturbances synchronized with seam events. Not knocks. Brushes. Enough to mark coincidence on a quiet slide. SOSUS nodes, the old ears on the seafloor, sit where sound travels far. Operators long ago learned local myths, whales, ice quakes, fishing fleets. Then came intervals of absence-presence, the term an analyst used when a volume of water behaved as if occupied by mass without the expected acoustic teeth. The absence passed like a shadow over a lens. Bearings stacked. The plot nudged toward cables and choke points. Choke points are where Doctrine gets nervous. Off the California islands, between the Bahamas and Puerto Rico, through Greenland, Iceland, UK gaps, navies rehearse. During these exercises, multiple crews reported silent escorts, fast movers holding offset positions like shepherds. They loitered near entry gates, drifted toward undersea cable junctions, then accelerated along the trench wall as the exercise surged. The official write-ups never called them escorts. They called them unresolved. Micro-stories give the pattern skin. A cable ship west of San Clemente went dark to dive a repeater. Divers prepping on deck watched a narrow seam run up current. The chief marked the time. Hours later, logs showed a temporary dip on the very span they were headed to inspect. The repeater tested fine. The bruise had already healed. Another, AP-8 dropped a sonobuoy line across a telecom corridor north of Puerto Rico. Most buoys heard the ocean's regulars. Two returned to taut silence, sliding fast and low, paralleling the trench rim before descending out of the net. The operator wrote fast mover in pencil, then erased the words and replaced them with transient anomaly. The file name didn't fool anyone in the room. The trenches host their own behavior. Bathymetry charts become stage directions. Contacts cling to the rim, trace the isobaths like rails, then fall into black. In the Puerto Rico Trench, a repeated pattern emerged. Entries near the shelf break, silent sprints along 3,000 meters, then disappearance beyond 6,000 where pressure makes the sea feel ancient. In the Aleutians, under the cover of northern edge, boats reported loiterers near canyon mouths. The return sat just off sensor-blind spots, moved when patrol arcs shifted, then returned to the same ledges as if inhabiting addresses. Restricted zones, ranges laced with hydrophones and cameras, should scare anomalies away. Instead, incidents cluster there. At AUTEC, technicians described clean passes through arrays, transits that registered as coherent pressure without phase noise. A scientist circled the word coherent 3 times on a printout, then filed it under a code that didn't mention the sea. Nearby, a power link flickered and steadied with the precision of a metronome. Across NATO, cables and nodes form a nervous system. After a series of unexplained outages in the eastern Atlantic, short-lived, self-clearing, sub-patrols shifted. P-8 tasking increased around junction boxes, sitting on the shoulder of the mid-Atlantic ridge. Flight crews logged more seam cuts there than anywhere else outside the California corridor. A planner drew a loop on a chart and wrote, simply, watch. Complications stack. Incidents often spike during high-interest windows, Software updates to undersea nodes, scheduled dives on repeaters, certification runs through choke points. The timing looks like curiosity with a calendar, or deception tuned to look like it. Either way, it bends operations. Hardening quietly increased. Guards around shore landings, encrypted telemetry layers on cable health, extra sensors near array edges. Public doctrine didn't change. Patrol routes did. One analyst's human moment. He fought to keep an impossible track in a data set correlating fast movers with node anomalies. A supervisor told him to drop it, outlier corruption. He ran the correlation again with different filters. The match climbed. He didn't win the argument that day. He won a month later when another exercise produced the same shape. The pattern stopped asking permission. Objects loiter near choke points, then vanish into trenches. They pace cables, brush power links, and pass through hydrophone curtains like they know where the gaps are, maybe because the gaps move and they move with them. Our response is the tell. Quiet hardening of select nodes. Patrols tightened around infrastructure. Airborne time shifted to watch seams instead of just wakes. The more we look, the weirder the data gets. That's not a flourish. It's the line briefers use when they're out of nouns the classification guide approves. And beneath it sits the same sentence that closed the room the first time. No acoustic or thermal correlates commensurate with observed kinematics. If something's mapping our arteries, it isn't splashing. It's taking notes. Sensor fusion, why multiple systems agree. One sensor can lie. A network builds a case. That's the quiet revolution that turned ghost stories into workload. Overlapping windows, sonar, radar, IR, EO, timed and geolocated tightly enough that impossible had to argue with concurrence. Start with sonar. Passive arrays don't see shapes. They hear behavior, blade rates, pumps, cavitation, hull flow. The fast mover tracks didn't sing, they pressed. Analysts logged coherent pressure displacements, sliding along bathymetry with no harmonic teeth. On 3 separate nights in the corridor, shore stations and shipboard stacks reported the same bearing drift within seconds, then the same dead stop, then the same sprint. The ocean refused to roar where the math said it should. While that was happening, surface search radar skimmed the sea at low-graze angles, and painted intermittent skin returns riding the boundary. Sea clutter should smear those. Instead, the return stabilized when sonar declared stationary, then stretched into streaks precisely as passive bearings began to clock. When the object turned 90 degrees, the radar vector snapped accordingly. 2 modalities, same kinematics. Infrared cameras watched for heat. They found a different kind of absence. Over the seam, IR should have seen a hot ribbon if rockets or cavitators were pumping energy into water. Instead, the picture held flat, no plume, no boil, until the exact moment radar showed acceleration. Then, a transient cooler line etched the surface as if the seam shed heat somewhere else and borrowed chill locally. The line vanished as sonar reported the sprint falling off their band. IR didn't confirm propulsion. It confirmed timing. Electro-optical cameras recorded the part crews talked around. A ruler-straight defect sliding upwind, crossing swell without braking. On review, frames flagged surface discontinuity, lined up to the second with sonar's pressure track and radar's streak. Analysts overlaid the feeds and used a word nobody likes in fleet circles, correlate. Not a perfect picture. Sea and sky rarely offer that, but a stacked set of clocks agreeing on when and where. Inside a vault, an analyst fought for an impossible, track the way people fight for their names. A senior told him to drop it, migrating clutter. He pulled the buoy logs, found the passive pressure step, pulled the EO frames, found the seam cut, pulled the radar data, found the low-graze return stabilizing on the stop. He stapled the stack together and wrote, cross-domain concurrence, confidence high. It stayed in. Complications made good stories worse. Missing frames appeared in recorder packages, exactly where emergence events should have been. Not erased, corrupted, like a swallow in the signal. A second set of logs, pulled from redundant recorders the crew didn't know were rolling, filled gaps just enough to keep sequences intact. Someone was sloppy, or someone else was careful. Either way, the stitched picture held. Spoofing got its day in court. Could a projector paint fake blade rates? Yes. Could a decoy paint radar? Yes. Could both maintain geometric coherence across sharp maneuvers while IR and EO picked up seam cuts in lockstep? The room shook its head. You can lie to a sensor. Lying to 4 at once, in time, across domains through turns at sea, is a different problem. If you can do that, you don't harass ranges, you own them. Micro-stories carried the weight of timings. A buoy operator marked a silent pressure ridge at 02:14:07Z. 2 decks up, a radar tech called stationary at 02:14:07Z. On the flight line, IR logged a transient cool defect starting at 02:14:08Z. EOs seen cross the frame at 02:14:09Z. For clocks, for systems, one event. The unit's XO traced the timestamps with a knuckle and didn't say what he was thinking. Another night, AP, 8 crew laid a ladder of sonobuoys across a trench rim. The center line went clean, no machinery, just a moving pressure step. Outboard buoys picked up nothing. The step drifted across the ladder exactly as a shore radar plot showed a skimmer. Return track pacing the rim. When the pressure step fell into the trench, radar lost the return at the lip. EO saw a seam fold and smooth. The crew's analyst wrote, probability of multi-sensor artifact low. The fusion team learned to speak in stacked verbs. Stop confirmed by radar vector collapse. Hold confirmed by constant bearing, decreasing range on passive. Sprint confirmed by radar streak, bearing rate spike, and IR transient. Turn confirmed by synchronized vector change and pressure ridge rotation. Each verb had timestamps. Each timestamp had a friend in another channel. That's how the 550-knot night survived redactions. The duty log said weather. The classified annex said otherwise. Passive reported pressure hold. Radar marked stationary. IR stayed flat. EO showed nothing remarkable. Then, in 4 seconds, radar registered a streak, passive bearings swung, IR etched a cooler scene, and EO captured nothing but the absence traveling too fast for the lens. The times matched. The numbers insulted Doctrine. The team wrote, again, confidence high. Here's the line that matters in those briefings. Enough multi-sensor concurrence to move beyond glitch. Nobody wrote origin. They wrote behavior with friends. And once behavior has friends, posture follows. More buoys, tighter radar modes at low grays. IR tuned for anomalies at the seam. EO rolling whenever the ocean looks too straight. If it's not ours and not theirs, someone wants it quiet. The sensors disagree. They're starting to sing the same song. Silence as policy, the soft cover-up. Public trust sounds noble in press conferences. In the building, it's a lever. The playbook for USOs isn't a dramatic order to bury truth. It's 1,000 small choices that make evidence hard to assemble. Minimize, mislabel, misplace, classify by association rather than content. Let the system's inertia do what a memo never should. Start with minimization. A seam cut becomes whitecaps. A dead stop at depth turns into instrument stability event. A 550-knot sprint translates as rapid bearing change incompatible with verification. If the nouns never cross into vehicle or craft, you don't trigger the classification keywords that would force a broader audience. Language is the first gasket, then mislabeling. Anomalies are filed under maintenance. Sonar oddities route through equipment performance. Radar streaks go to EMI/C clutter review. Once the ticket number belongs to a reliability program, the content inherits its privacy. The story didn't vanish, it changed departments. Good luck foiling a ghost. Misplacing is the quiet art. Records that connect seam events to transmedium behavior are split into neat slices. Sonar here, radar there, IR/EO in a third bin, each with a different steward. The only complete picture lives in a compartment whose name never appears on a standard request. People say no responsive documents because technically that's true. The responsive ones live behind a fence with a code word you didn't know to ask for. Classification by association finishes the circuit. Mention a sensor tied to a special access program, and the whole report inherits that program's walls, even if the anomaly itself didn't require the sensor. Now a single line about no acoustic correlate rides inside a vault meant to protect hardware specs. You can't extract the sentence without bleeding the program, so it stays put, and the public story arrives with the middle ripped out. The human angle wears thin under this. FOIA officers send form letters by the stack. We conducted a thorough search. They did, within their lane. Meanwhile, the most interesting logs were refiled as weather summaries, because an officer told a watchstander to keep the language clean. A tired major jokes about buying a rubber stamp that just says, "Try another office." It's not malice. It's attrition. Leaks are pressure valves. A cockpit tape escapes. A radar clip surfaces. Media cycles flare, then cool when documents don't backfill. Without records, the story floats as anecdote. Internally, clearances tighten, access logs grow teeth. Externally, crews learn to avoid certain words in unclassified systems. You can feel everyone edging their nouns away from the fence. Inside, posture changes anyway. Extra sonobuoys in the corridor. P-8 orbits nudged toward cable junctions. Low-graze radar modes favored during exercises. IR tuned to catch cool seams instead of hot plumes. No public Doctrine update announces any of this. The ocean doesn't get press releases. Sailors get new checklists and a reminder to write weather. A microstory pins it down. An intel officer briefs a seam-linked emergence, slides marked operational anomaly. A colonel asks origin. The briefer says, behavior focus, sir. The colonel nods. After the meeting, he asks for the full data package. 2 days later, he receives 3 slices that don't meet in the middle. He signs a tasking memo creating an internal list of coincidence and moves on. The soft cover-up isn't a wall, it's fog. Redactions play their role. Pages arrive with polite black bars, headers intact so you know what you're missing. The pattern turns into negative space you learn to read by absence. Environmental variance repeats on nights with known seams. Instrument scatter blooms around fast movers. It's bureaucratic wallpaper pasted over a doorframe. Meanwhile, the witness pipeline refuses to go dark. A sonar chief tells a staffer, off record, that whitecaps meant a seam cut. AP-8 analyst mails a timestamp list without context, trusting someone else to connect it. A range tech says the word coherent, like it's contraband, and hangs up fast. The building can thin paper. It can't erase memory that wants company. This is how a cover-up survives an audit. Nobody lies in bold letters. Everyone trims. The story fractures into pieces that don't trigger alarms alone. The fragments live in veterans' heads, in mislabeled binders, in folders named for weather. And every few months, another line escapes. 550 knots underwater, no acoustic or thermal correlate, behavior consistent across sensors. The fog holds. The line cuts through it anyway, reconstructing the night, minute-by-minute breakdown. 2,204 Zulu. Initial detection. A faint return kisses the edge of sea clutter at low grays. Range, 14 nautical miles. Bearing, 217. The operator tags it for track quality, mentally filing it under watch don't waste. Sonar's passive stack registers nothing. Unusual, shrimp, distant screws, a low wind on the array. 2205:12Z, bearing drift accelerates. Range collapses in clean steps like a metronome you didn't set. Surface search promotes the contact from ambiguous to tentative. The petty officer pulls the range gate tighter, toggles sea state filters. The return holds. It isn't a wave train, and it isn't random. 2206:40Z. Sonar calls a pressure rise. No blade count, no cavitation bloom. Just mass moving water without biting it. Possible fast mover, the supervisor says, keeping his voice flat. CIC marks the plot with a cautious symbol and a provisional speed that already looks impolite. 2207:03Z. Bearing freezes while range ticks in. Radar's vector stabilizes. Sonar's pressure builds into a steady, coherent signature, like a hand pressed on a table. EO/IR panning wide shows a calm surface. The log clocks a 3-system concurrence. Stop, hold, unknown depth. 2207:41Z. The TO orders time marks every 10 seconds. The room narrows. You can hear headset fabric when it moves. The XO reaches for his coffee and doesn't drink. Diagnostics run in the background, green lights piling up like witnesses who all agree. 2208:10Z. Dead stop confirmed. Range steady at 8.9 nautical miles. Bearing steady. Sonar, no tonal. No bloom. Signature constant. IR, negative thermal anomaly. EO, surface normal. The silence starts to feel loud. 2208:26Z. The first complication. A second, weaker return enters at a slight offset. 3 degrees right, 2 miles farther. Sonar echoes it with a faint, coherent pressure echo. The TO designates it contact Bravo, sets a shadow track, and asks for correlation windows to widen. 2209:02Z. Contact Alpha twitches. A tiny vector, like a muscle test, then relaxes. The room breathes out and immediately regrets it. Contact Bravo closes the offset, sliding toward Alpha's position with lazy inevitability. Sonar can't decide if it's a separate body or a pressure shadow. 2209:37Z. Merge event window opens. Radar shows the two returns within the same cell for 1.7 seconds. Then only one. Sonar's faint echo dissolves into the main pressure hold. Merged or vanished, the supervisor says. Confidence low on separation. The TO notes coalescence, with a question mark that looks heavier than ink. 221:11Z. Everything waits. 10 seconds. 20. 30. The plotter's pencil ticks the seconds into hash marks. The watchstander's headset leaves a deeper imprint on his temple. In the quiet, the ship hums like it always does, unaware it's sharing water with an argument against hydrodynamics. 221:42Z. Acceleration onset. Not a ramp. A step. Radar vector extends like a snapped cord. Bearing rate spikes past comfortable numbers. The operator clears his throat and says it anyway. Speed 550 knots equivalent. Sonar's pressure signature elongates, coherence intact, no harmonic teeth. IR etches a transient cool seam that drags the surface like a faint scar. 221:47Z. Course cut. Alpha swings 90 degrees starboard inside a radius that should throw a wake like a whip. It doesn't. Radar's streak bends sharp. Passive bearings rotate in sync, smooth as if the ocean agreed to move out of the way. EO sees nothing but normalcy made suspicious by timing. 2211:13Z. Bathymetry counter-trace begins. Alpha rides the 200-meter isobath south, hugging the shelf like it's on rails. The navigator overlays a chart and starts calling out depth contours like landmarks. Passing the spur, approaching the notch, holding the rim. Speed holds obscene. 2211:48Z. Dead stop 2. From sprint to still in under 3 seconds. Range now 6.1 nautical miles. Bearing 218 steady. Sonar confirms pressure hold. IR seam cool fades. Radar vector collapses. The room counts out loud this time, because counting is control. 2212:20Z. Vertical behavior suggests. Sonar stack hints at a depth change. Pressure signature thickens, as if the object compresses the column without stirring it. No bubble, no plume. Possible climb to surface layer, Sonar says. EO pans for a seam. Nothing yet. 2212:39Z. Second sprint. This one along the rim toward the continental lip. Radar's streak lengthens. Sonar's bearing rate swings. IR faint cool line reappears for 2 seconds. The TO asks for P8 orbit update. They're too far to help and told to hold. 2213:14Z. Shelf edge arrival. Bathymetry chart shows the drop, blue to black. Alpha slows, first deceleration with slope, and then tips over the line. Sonar's pressure signature thins as if mass left a grip. Radar loses the low grays return. IR goes flat. EO stays a blank horizon with an ordinary moon track. 2213:27Z. Disappearance. No splash. No boil. Just an empty box on the plot and a clock full of fresh ink. The TO calls Mark, then calls secure external comms. Local record only. Restricted distribution. The petty officer writes the words he's been told to write. Weather benign, see state 3. He adds a dot in the margin that means something to him, and nobody else. 2214:05Z. Post-event checks begin. Power rails nominal. Sync pulses clean. Radar calibration in spec. Sonar self-test passes. EO lens clear. IR detector temperature steady. If the system lied, it did so with grace across independent clocks. The TO circles systems nominal and underlines it twice. 2215:22Z. A faint return to the south flickers, maybe a ghost of Alpha, maybe a trawler's mast. Sonar hears a fishing boat a dozen miles off. The room releases its breath in pieces. Someone finally drinks the cold coffee and makes a face he doesn't comment on. 2217:00Z. The brief draft is born. Unresolved operational anomaly. It says, because language is armor. The watch changes at 22:30. The petty officer peels the headset off and rubs the crescent it left, feeling like an artifact himself. In the reconstruction, the power is in the timing. Stops that hold across radar and passive. Sprints that light up vectors and leave the ocean quiet. Turns that obey the chart, not the fluid. A merge window with a second object that either joined or chose not to exist. And an exit that treats a continental drop like a hallway, not a cliff. The diagnostics say the ship was fine. The water says it was undisturbed. The plot says something else wrote itself across their screens and used the shelf as a guide. Minute by minute, the night refuses to be a glitch. Minute by minute, it becomes a message no one knows how to read aloud. The Pentagon's dilemma, unknowns with command of the ocean. Inside the earring, the slide deck didn't ask, "What is it?" first. It asked, "What can we say without breaking something else?" Stakes framed every option. Fleet survivability if it's real, deterrent stability if it's foreign, escalation control if it's misread. The first chart was an options table with 3 boxes. Foreign breakthrough, sensor error, non-human technology. Each came with costs the room could feel. Foreign breakthrough meant someone had leaped a century of ocean physics and was flying under our hulls. If that's true, force posture changes yesterday. Retask P8s, redeploy subs. Assume your acoustic advantage is gone, and red team every choke point where cables and trenches meet. But admit it out loud, and you hand a rival leverage and spark a budget knife fight that eats a year while the ocean doesn't wait. Sensor error sounded safer until the second slide. To sustain a 550-knot lie, independent systems would need to fail in chorus. Passive acoustics inventing coherent pressure, low-graze radar stabilizing sea skimmers, IR drawing cool seams at sprint onset, EO catching ruler-straight defects in surface texture across nights and ranges. If that's the case, the net we trust to guard carriers has a systemic hole. Fixing it means grounding confidence, rewriting tactics, and admitting to allies that the picture we sold them wasn't complete. Non-human technology sat in a box nobody wanted to own, labeled for internal use only. You don't brief origin, you brief capability. Silent sprints beyond cavitation limits, right-angle turns without fluid bite, stop on command at depth, seamless movement between air and sea. If a vehicle can edit the medium, deterrence math changes. Weapons built to punish speed and movement lose teeth. Patrol arcs assume a partner you can't chase and can't hear. Briefers measured their words like they were handling explosives. Behavior-focused assessment, they said. Threat-agnostic posture. Those phrases kept the conversation on what to do, not what to call it. The choices branched, not from belief, but from risk. If foreign, increased surveillance of the corridor and trench rims, tighten protection around cables and nodes, bake seam detection into every exercise. If sensor, audit fleets, harden recorders, instrument redundancy, and stop treating anomalies like paperwork. If neither, plan for a player in the ocean that doesn't bargain with our physics. Complications were political as much as technical. Any admission, foreign or unknown, reshapes budgets. Air wants sensors, sea wants patrol time, intel wants compartments, space wants tasking on overheads to watch seams. The building can't turn on a dime without cutting someone else's project. A cautious solution emerged. Adjust posture at sea quietly, keep doctrine unchanged on paper, and let classification absorb the shock. That's why crews saw more buoys in the corridor and more P8 time over cable junctions, but no press release. That's why low-graze radar modes showed up in exercise tasking, and IR got tuned for cool seams, not hot plumes. The public story stayed unidentified airborne. The internal slides began to say Transmedium incidents, then tucked the words behind a code word. In one closed session, a flag officer asked the question everyone avoided. If it isn't ours or theirs, are we already in a shared domain? The briefer didn't answer. He flipped to a chart of Catalina pins and trench transits and said, "We're mapping." "Presence, sir." Afterward, posture memos went out with new watch items. Seam cuts, splash events without splash, dead stops at depth. Allies complicated the board. Partners in NATO and the Pacific sent their own quiet notes. Silent sprints near cables, trench loiterers, emergence events in range boxes. Coordinate too openly, and you risk leaks and debate. Coordinate too little, and you miss the pattern. A small cell formed to trade timings and behaviors without nouns. It kept the net stitched while politics cooled. Meanwhile, intelligence tried the obvious. Could this be deception? The red team built scenarios, projectors painting sonar, low-profile skimmers staging seams, coordinated radar spoofs. They could break a sensor. They couldn't keep 4 agreeing through right angles at sea in bad weather. The report didn't rule deception out. It called it insufficient to explain concurrence. In the aftermath of the 550-knot night, a guidance note landed on fleet desks. Treat seams as operational cues. Record locally when possible. Escalate on secure circuits. avoid speculative language in open systems. It read like policy made at a sprint. It was. Nobody wanted to trigger panic, and nobody wanted to get caught flat if the ocean wasn't ours alone. Here's the quiet truth in those rooms. The dilemma isn't choosing a box. It's acting as if any box could be true tomorrow. So posture shifts without press, budgets flex inside compartments, and briefers keep using verbs. Stops, turns, sprints, emerges. Because verbs demand action, and the nouns foreign, censor, non-human, carry fires they aren't ready to light. The meaning of 550 knots, edges of our map. Start with the minimums. A craft that stops on command at depth, turns inside its own wake without the ocean biting back, and sprints at 550 knots underwater without plume or roar, is meeting three thresholds. It's controlling the boundary layer, it's decoupled from fluid-borne control surfaces, and it's managing inertial loads that would crush human frames. Those aren't upgrades. Those are different rules. Field control is the first deduction. If the medium doesn't scream, the interaction's been edited. Whether by induced sheath, altered viscosity, or something stranger, the water's punishment is being redirected or refused. That implies a stability envelope held by something other than fins and thrust vectoring. Point and translate looks like magic until you call it enforced reference frames. Next is inertial handling. Our bodies, our airframes, our subs, all bargain with G-loads. Abrupt stops and right-angle cuts at triple-digit underwater speeds would pulp crews unless the interior experiences a different acceleration than the exterior. Call it damping, call it isolation. Either way, the craft protects occupants or doesn't carry any. If it's uncrewed, the design choices get colder. If it's crewed, you're staring at an engineering ethic we don't possess yet. Transmedium sealing follows. Seam cuts and splashless splashes say the boundary is optional. No spray on exit, no shock on entry, no thermal scar either way. That means pressure management that laughs at gradients, materials that don't heat the way ours do, and a control loop fast enough to ride the seam like a rail. At minimum, it's a vehicle that treats the air-water border as cosmetic. And yet, our sensors see just enough to be concerned, not enough to be sure. Pressure steps without teeth. Radar streaks at the boundary. IR going subtly cool when it should go hot. EO seeing ruler-straight wrongness on the water's skin. Enough to map behaviors, not origin. Enough to change posture, not doctrine. A sailor voiced the quiet part during a closed-door debrief. He stared at the Catalina chart, at the pins stacked along the shelf, and asked, if they wanted us gone, would we know? The room didn't answer. It logged the question. Because meaning lives there, in the gap between capability and intent. So what does 550 knots underwater tell us? That the ocean isn't passive space. It's occupied by actors that navigate our bathymetry, respect our cables enough to brush them, and ignore the physics we use to find and stop things. It redraws our map's edge, not as a coastline, but as a seam, one we didn't stitch and don't control. We end where we began, at speed, underwater, beyond our playbook. The ocean remembers what we'd rather forget. That speed isn't a number. It's the line where our certainties end and someone else's begin. If you want the classified breadcrumbs we couldn't show here, subscribe. Watch the deep dive on Transmedium craft next. We connect the Catalina Corridor to recent Navy drone swarms. New episodes weekly.